Welcome back. I'm Will Schademann,
I'm Jake Peterson.
and this is the part 2 of the Post Bowl podcast.
Here to start with Nebraska USC. USC ended up winning that game 45-42 despite a late comeback from Nebraska. They just weren't able to have enough in the tank to stop USC's offense and not have enough in the tank to eventually score enough points on USC's defense. My opinion in this ball game, I was very impressed with Barney Cotton, the way he had these guys ready to go. He made them play to win, not to lose, and it ended up leading to a very close loss for Nebraska. And I think not a lot of people gave Nebraska a lot of chance, but nevertheless, they still came within 3 points. I'd say that's better than what they were expected to do.
I definitely agree, Jake. Yeah, I believe Nebraska did pretty well despite the distraction of Oakland getting fired at Nebraska. And Barney Cotton did a very, very good job as the interim coach for Nebraska as well. I was very impressed with how he ran that team in San Diego. And also with USC, they kind of took the foot off the gas in that fourth quarter. They were kind of playing more conservative. Their play calling, and they were running like second and third down, and then they had to pass third down. And so, that pretty much that cost them a lot of points, and a lot of opportunities to pretty much take Nebraska out of the question. But they kept Nebraska in it, and Nebraska responded well. And then despite with the turnovers, USC somehow just put the pedal on the ground and somehow won that game. And next we have Miami of Florida and South Carolina. South Carolina won that game 24-21, and South Carolina had a pretty good win against a very, very good Miami team. And South Carolina needed that win, and Steve Spurrier got that win for them, and that was a good win.
Yeah, I felt like South Carolina's defense really stepped up in that game, not expected to step up in an occasion like that. Against a relatively decent Miami offense, Brad Kaya is going to be getting better every year that he's there. But I was really impressed with the way South Carolina played that game. They deserved to win. They're the better team. Moving on now to Iowa, Tennessee. Yeah, it was kind of a disappointing show up for Iowa's defense. I felt like tackling was just atrocious the whole game. However, Tennessee, got to give them credit. They went in and played their tails off, and the better team won in that game. I mean, they just had the better athletes than Iowa did. They were just outmatched in every category of the game at that point. And give credit to their backup. He really showed some heart of lions right there. He's going to be a future star there at Tennessee. And obviously right now too, Butch Jones really making some good recruits, continuing to clean house in the recruiting department. Expect Tennessee to be really, really good as soon as next year, frankly.
I do agree, Jake. Yeah, Iowa, as far as I'm concerned, a really, really disappointing game on the 2nd of January. I was expecting more out of them in that game. I was expecting them to play a little bit better than they did. Mm-hmm. And me with them being an Iowa fan, I was shocked on how they performed and how atrocious, just like you mentioned, the tackling was in the first and second half. And also the offense really wasn't clicking as well as they should have been either. And that's all I have for that.
Yeah, moving on now to the Auburn-Wisconsin game. Obviously, this was a huge milestone for the Big Ten in this game. And a huge milestone for the SEC. I mean, not in a good way, though, for the SEC's sake. Frankly, Wisconsin dominated that game from start to finish. It shouldn't have been that close. I don't know what happened to Wisconsin's defense. They didn't play all that well again. However, Melvin Gordon, he was the hero. I mean, not literally the hero, the kicker for Wisconsin definitely pulled through for him. But Melvin Gordon, though, was just unbelievable in that game. Auburn didn't have an answer on defense, and there's obviously got to be some big adjustments when Will Muschamp comes in next season. Gus Malzahn's got his work cut out for him on that defensive side of the football. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to Auburn, not to mention, too, you are losing a solid quarterback in Nick Marshall and a very good receiver, Sammy Coates. So it'll be interesting to see what Auburn does. This will be next year will be the first real year you're going to find out about Gus Malzahn. He's going to have a few of his own players in there playing. and Auburn's going to be a relatively younger team, so it'll be interesting to see how they respond to adversity.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And Melvin Gordon, as far as I'm concerned, was the MVP of that game. And he rushed for like 200 and 300 yards, something like that.
Just another day for
yeah,
Melvin Gordon.
exactly.
Yeah.
Just a little ho-hum day for Melvin
Yeah.
Gordon. But yeah, Melvin Gordon, he was the biggest factor for Wisconsin in his ability to break tackles and as quick and powerful as he is. Really put Wisconsin over the top, and it was so nice to see Barry Alvarez get that win. Being the interim coach, I really wanted Barry Alvarez to get that win. Wisconsin did that for him, in which I'm so pleased about. And that was a big game for the Big Ten as far as I'm concerned, just like you mentioned earlier. And the SEC kind of struggled this year in the bowl games as far as I'm concerned. They kind of had a disappointing bowl season this year.
Yeah, the SEC West especially, it just wasn't good. The SEC East, those guys over there were sticking their chests out saying, hey, we finished undefeated, but then you look on the SEC West side, they finished 2-5. Frankly, should have finished 1-6 had Quentin Trickett playing for West Virginia. So, I mean, this was really a disappointing bowl season for the SEC West. Obviously, there was a high expectations, and it just fell. I mean, there was just nothing there for the SEC West. Like I said, we'll get to that later too. Our thoughts on the SEC West. Do we think the so-called dynasty is over for the whole SEC? Well, we'll talk about that later. Speaking of the SEC struggles, TCU Ole Miss. That was a terrible game for Ole Miss. I tell you what, though, after watching TCU play, I've not seen a team this whole bowl season, including Oregon, that was more impressive than TCU. TCU was just outstanding in that game, though. They dominated every phase of the game. Everybody was blaming Bo Wallace in that game. You can't really blame Bo Wallace when the offensive line was getting dominated from start to finish by that TCU D-line, and let's face it, they didn't even bring blitz hardly in that game. But Paul Dawson, the linebacker, for TCU had an outstanding performance along with Marcus Mallett. Sam Carter, I thought, did well in the safety spot. Chris Hackett opened up with the interception. And that TCU defense was just downright stout. Everybody was criticizing them after that 61-58 loss to Baylor. But when you're facing against the best offense in the country in Baylor, it's pretty tough. And not to mention, too, they had a lot of injuries at the time. Gary Patterson made the adjustments he needed to since then. Defense has been stout ever since. And not to mention, too, the offense is always all but disappointing for TCU. Trevon Boykin didn't have a great game, 3 interceptions, but also threw for 3 touchdowns, 5 turnovers total for TCU, but still managed to put up 42 points, and that defense still managed to only give up 3. I mean, this TCU team didn't have their best game, and they still blew out a mighty SEC West team in Ole Miss.
I definitely agree, Jake. Yeah, TCU had probably the best game day in college football this year, bar none. Despite those turnovers, just like you mentioned, they played a heck of a game. And just like you mentioned with Dawson as one of their linebackers and one of their defensive main fronts, he really performed well and really showed the NFL scouts of what he could do on Sundays, and which I believe he will be in the NFL one day. And then as far as Ole Miss goes is concerned, just like you mentioned, it's not on Bo Wallace on this one, folks. It's mostly on the offensive line because of their lack of protection for Bo Wallace, because that's what the offensive line's supposed to do is protect the quarterback, and quite frankly they did not do that against TCU. And that's all I have for that one. And then now we're going to be going to Clemson and Oklahoma, where Clemson won 40-6 against Oklahoma, just like I mentioned. And Clemson had a pretty good game against Oklahoma, and Clemson really impressed me as far as I'm concerned. And like Oklahoma, with the injuries of Trevor Knight and Samaje Perine, that was really self-evident by that loss.
Yeah, to me though, it's just still no excuse to the way how Oklahoma performed. I mean, that was just a terrible ball game. There was one team that wanted to be there and the other one didn't, and it showed on the scoreboard, it showed in the stats. There was just nothing to like about Oklahoma in that football game. Trevor Knight did not do anything on the offensive side of the football. Neither did Samaje Perine, although to his credit, though, the offensive line didn't help matters. Sterling Shepard had a terrible game at the receiving core, and you need him to step up because he is their go-to guy, and that's something that Oklahoma's lacked for the last couple of years now, is a receiver. And Sterling Shepard's their top receiver, and but that's the problem. Nobody else is around him. For the first 6 or 7 games, I believe, of the season, Sterling Shepard was the only receiver to catch a touchdown pass. So I think Oklahoma really, really struggled this year. They turned out to be a very mediocre team, a lot of high expectations for them. It just didn't end well for them. Obviously, Bob Stoops firing a couple of his offensive coordinators, co-offensive coordinators, and then he promoted his D-line coach to a co-defensive coordinator with his brother Mike Stoops, which I believe that should have been a changing spot as well on that defensive side, because when you have a team that had as much talent on defense as Oklahoma, like Eric Stryker, Geno Grissom, and Zach Sanchez, and you can't utilize them correctly like Mike Stoops wasn't able to do that this year, there were obviously needed to be some changes. I didn't think they were going to keep Mike Stoops, but it's pretty tough to fire your brother, though. And as far as Oklahoma goes as a team, they had the talent to go all the way. They just didn't utilize it right. There was a lot of injuries again. Something that they had problems with last year as well. So I'll be interested to see who Bob Stoops ends up hiring in the OC spot. But it'll be interesting to see also, though, how the Oklahoma program responds next season, because I don't know what to think of them at this point.
I agree.
Moving on now to see, there's the playoff. I mean, what's there to say? It was one game was a blowout and the other one was a good game. As far as the Oregon-Florida State game, Florida State had no business being there. I mean, you just can't put a team in that commits 5 turnovers in the playoff. No, they didn't deserve to be there. I know they went undefeated. I know they're the defending national champs, but they were standing on thin ice to begin with, and it finally broke through for them. And Oregon, you just can't give them the ball. You got to keep it out of Marcus Mario's hands as long of a time as possible, and Florida State just didn't do that because they turned the ball over so much. And everybody was giving Oregon credit to score 59 points on Florida State. Well, at the same token, though, it's pretty easy to put up 59 points when you have 5 turnovers in one half. So give Oregon credit. They played a good game. Florida State, however, the team they played, didn't belong there. Frankly, I'm questioning the fact that after watching Florida State in that game, if they were even a top 10 team. I mean, they were just that bad. Oregon, they're going to have a much tougher task on their hands when we get to the other game later.
I definitely agree, Jake. Yeah, Jameis Winston and the offensive front and offensive play played terrible.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, how can you commit 5 turnovers in a game against one of probably the best teams in the country in the lane in Oregon? Well, Mark Helfrich will make you pay for those turnovers, and that's pretty self-evident with his blowout win, 59-20. Especially in this big of a game, whenever you commit 5 turnovers, it's going to cost you, and it costs Florida State big, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And now we go to Ohio State and Alabama, and in my opinion, Jake, I think this one was a shocker. I was expecting Alabama to win and play Oregon in the finals, but Ohio State pulled it off. Cardell Jones and Ezekiel Elliott on the running back and quarterback core for the offensive side of the ball for the Buckeyes had a very, very, very good game. And Ezekiel Elliott was highlighted with an 85-yard touchdown run to the house, which was impressive with how good Alabama's defense is. And Blake Sims, he pretty much cost Alabama the game. He was very, very inconsistent in that game, and that's very self-evident.
Yeah. As far as this game goes, there weren't a lot of weaknesses on Ohio State's game as far as just watching them. I don't know if I want to blame Blake Sims necessarily. I'm going to honestly put it on Lane Kiffin. I thought Alabama was doing terrific in the first half, running the football with Derrick Henry. They established the identity, I thought, and when they got up 21-6, I think everybody, including myself, thought, oh boy, this isn't going to be good. they came back though, and the reason being is Lane Kiffin started to make some dumb play calls as far as making Blake Sims throw the football when clearly the run game was working for him in the first half. That's why Ohio State though was able to get back in the game, because Lane Kiffin was changed up the play calling in the second half to just take the handcuffs off of Blake Sims, and it turned out to be a disaster for Alabama from there on. And I tell you what, Alabama though, as a team, they just simply weren't as motivated as Ohio State, though. Ohio State came to play in that game, nevertheless, and they won. Kirby Smart's defense wasn't ready either. I mean, their defense looked atrocious. Ezekiel Elliott was just running right up the gut on them the whole game, and Alabama just did not have an answer for that mighty front seven of Alabama. They just didn't do anything, and frankly, Ohio State deserved that win, and it'll be interesting to see what they can do against Oregon. I mean, what is your pick for the final?
I got Oregon.
You got Oregon, yeah. I got Ohio State. I think if Ohio State doesn't turn the ball over in that game, which I don't think they're going to, I think Ohio State eventually pulls it out against Oregon. I think Oregon's run defense showed a lot of vulnerability against Florida State with Dalvin Cook. I know, Ohio State did too against Derrick Henry, but again, we're talking about Alabama's O-line blocking, not, it's a little bit of a different story with Marcus Mariota. If they can keep Marcus Mariota contained as well, I think Ohio State has a very solidified chance of winning this championship game, and frankly could very easily handle them.
And then that's all we have for this part 2. Thank you very much for your time.